Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. It's very nice to have you here for this pre-Pesach gear up, so to speak. We're very fortunate. We've kind of moved things around with our Beit Midrash Kilati. As you've noticed, I'm talking today. Laura, my wife, will be talking on Wednesday when I normally talk. Also next week, Rav Chaim will be giving a halacha shir on Monday. And on Wednesday, we'll be joined by Rav Benji Myers, who's actually here as well and has joined. We'll be giving a practical workshop on preparing for the Seder, preparing around COVID. What we're going to be looking at tonight as our first kind of intro into Pesach. By the way, just as an aside, I'm not sure who gets more worked up for Pesach earlier, right? Whether it's the Rabbanim who start thinking about Divrei Torah and Shiurim, or whether it's the people that clean the houses and start thinking, and it's all balagan, and all the more so obviously during COVID. But be that as it may, it's a bit early in the piece, but it's also good to start thinking about the Haggadah, thinking about ideas for the Haggadah, and that's what we're going to be doing this evening. We're going to be looking at the famous Maaseh of Rabbi Akiva, or the famous Maaseh in Bnei Brak, which is in the middle of our Haggadah. Oftentimes it's kind of glossed over, not paid attention to, and other times, and as we'll see, I'll bring some other opinions about what it means. People deal with it in depth. And so let's get right in there. Let's start. I'll share my screen and we'll begin just by reading out the Maaseh. So we have here a section from the Haggadah. Some of the sources will be in English, some of them will be in Hebrew. And we have the section which begins, Avadim Hayinu Laparo B'Mitzrayim, right? Part of Magid. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. And after we go through and we read that Hashem took us out of there and it's a mitzvah for us to tell the Sipur of Yetziat Mitzrayim, we have what we're talking about tonight. And let's read it. Let's read it. Maaseh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon. This was an act, an event, a maaseh, right? Just like, not Bua Maasehs, but the same idea, a story of something that once happened. When Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, right? Some of the most important Tanaim in the middle of the generations of the Tanaim, and that will become important later. Shayu Mesubim b'Bnei Brak. They were gathered all together in Bnei Brak. Now, I will just say on the outside, something that is so special about living in the modern state of the Jewish people is in the names of the places, right? In England, interestingly, they have strange names for places. They have like Dewey's Hump or something, and they have St. John's Wood, all these different places, which to like an Australian ear sounds a little bit British and funny. But in Israel, you have something called Somet Mesubin near Bnei Brak. And why is it called Somet Mesubin? Because of this Maaseh, right? So the names, the streets are all connected not only to biblical places, but also to the stories from the Haggadah. And so every time I read this, I'm always reminded of Somet Mesubin near Bnei Brak. And they were gathered in Bnei Brak. They would tell, they told the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim all of that night. Until their students came and said to them, Rabotenu, our teachers, the time has come to say Kriyat Shema Shachrit. They were obviously so heavily engrossed in the story that they weren't able to know what was happening. Perhaps they didn't see it was time to daven, and then the Talmidim came and said it's now time for the Kriyat Shema of Shachar. And then the story continues. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, it's not really the story continues, but it's a kind of continuation of the section. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, one of the people at the center, says, today I'm like someone who is 70. We're going to talk about this section in a little bit. But these few lines, right, what are they doing here? What's the point of them? Why do we say at this point in the Seder, and most importantly, what we're going to look at tonight, what's the deeper message going on here? A number of suggestions have been proposed. I'll just take one at the outset, which is quite well known, I think, proposed by someone known as Cecil Roth. What he wanted to say was what actually was going on here was a Seder at the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Why the rebellion started by the Jews, by Bar Kokhba, supported by Rabbi Akiva, By the way, Bnei Brak is the hometown of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the Maradas of Bnei Brak, right? And so according to Cecil Roth, why is it that they weren't able to know when Kriyat Shema was? Perhaps they were in a cave, even though in Bnei Brak there aren't really caves. Perhaps they were in a cave, and they didn't know, and therefore they had to be told. And he reads it in that light. I'm going to disagree mainly with that opinion, although I think that opinion can lead us to a deeper understanding. But before we get into these deeper understandings and other ideas, let's just read the pshat. Let's just give examples of the pshat, the simple reason for why this story is here. And the basic reason is connected to the section that's just above, which we read already. We were slaves in Egypt, the beginning of what we're talking about, and Hashem took us out. And then the pasuk, or the verse in the Haggadah says, "Va'afilu kulanu chachamim." Even if all of us were wise and all of us were knowledgeable and all of us were elders, kulanu yodim Torah. Even if we all knew the whole Torah, it's a mitzvah upon us to tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And anyone that keeps going and says it as much as possible, anyone who speaks about it as much as possible, he should be praised. And so on a simple reading, the reason why we have exactly after this section, Maaseh Rabbi Elazar, because these are 5 Tanaim, these are 5 Gdoilim, these are 5 Chachamim, Nevonim, they Yodin et Torah, and yet they deal with Yetziat Mitzrayim all night. They're able to go into detail and to talk about the story, so much so they get distracted. They don't realize it's the time of Kriyat Shema in the morning, and that's a simple level. Another possible or another element to this simple reading is based on a particular machloket amongst the rabbis. In the Tosefta, a Tosefta being the addendum to the Mishnah and added things that were added onto the Mishnah, kind of more explanatory things, we have another maaseh, another story, which is told about Rabban Gamliel Uskenim. Shayu Mesubin Bebeit Baitus Benzunim Balud. They were gathered one evening, or the evening of Pesach, in the house of Beitus Benzunin in Lud, in another town, in Lod, right? Today we call Lod. And they dealt in the laws of Pesach all of the night until the call of the rooster in the morning. And then they went to the Beit Midrash probably to pray. Now, again, people read this also on a deeper level, and I'll explain that in a second. But on a simple level, what are they talking about all that night? They're talking about something else. They are talking about, Vayu Asukin Behilchot HaPesach Kol Halayla. They dealt with the laws of the Korban Pesach all that night, meaning there is a machloket between the Tosefta and between the Haggadah Shel Pesach. What are we meant to be doing on the night of Pesach? Are we meant to be talking about, I'll skip up to the section. Are we talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim, the leaving from Egypt, the exodus, how it happened? Or are we talking about the Korban? And this becomes a serious machloket. And there are those that want to say, amongst them, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, right? They wanted to say that this Tosefta perhaps even happened at the same time, because there was a machloket between Rabban Gamliel and some of the other sages about what you're meant to talk about. Rabban Gamliel argued that even though the Beit HaMikdash has been destroyed, right? They're living a few years after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Even though the Beit HaMikdash has been destroyed, we deal with the Korban Pesach, the sacrifice of the Pesach, because that is how we're able to still fulfill the Korban Pesach. We have this idea, it's mentioned in a number of Gemaras. Why is it? How can we fulfill Korbanot? How can we fulfill the things that were connected to the Beit HaMikdash when there is no Beit HaMikdash? So you fulfill it by learning the laws of the sacrifices, and in that way we're able to fulfill it. And Rabban Gamliel felt that what you should be doing after the destruction of the temple was learning Hilchot HaPesach, the laws of the Pesach, whereas our Haggadah brings this maaseh to perhaps teach us that we should hold like the other Rabbanim and or Rabbi Akiva, and that we should be talking about the story of going out of Egypt once the temple is destroyed. And I'm going to come back to this because this is actually quite essential to what I want to argue. But at a very simple level, why is it here? One of the reasons is to teach us what we're meant to be dealing with during Pesach. And with the focus, according to the Baal Haggadah, is perhaps Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim and not the laws of the Korban Pesach. Finally, another pshat, which is important to know, which is another thing that the Baal Haggadah wants to teach us by bringing this ma'aseh, is connected to another machloket, also connected to the Korban Pesach. And it's mentioned here in the Gemara in Brachot. And it says here, Ve'ilu achilat pesachim lo katani. It's talking about the Mishnah, the first Mishnah in Shas, that you need to finish saying Kriyat Shema until midnight and not until the morning. And here the Gemara says, but regarding the eating of the Pesach, it wasn't said that you need to end it until Chatzot. There is a debate amongst the sages between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, what you're meant to do on the night of Pesach, whether you're meant to try and finish the eating of the Korban Pesach until midnight, or whether you can go until the morning. And perhaps what the Baal Haggadah is saying is that we rule like Rabbi Akiva. The story of Yetziat Mitzrayim is connected to the eating of the Korban Pesach, and that takes place until Higia Zman Kriyat Shema Shel Shachrit. They learned and dealt with the story of Pesach, which is parallel to the eating of the Korban Pesach, until Shachris, right? And so just to summarize where we are at this point, I've said there are three reasons on the pshat level why the Baal Haggadah includes this story. The first is to teach us that everyone needs to deal with the story of the Exodus. Everyone, even if you're smart, even if you're wise, even if you know the whole Torah, you need to deal all night with the story. And then they bring a story of wise Talmidei Chachamim, Gdolei Hador, that dealt with the story of Pesach. The second reason I wanted to suggest is that there is a dispute whether the focus of our Seder today, once the temple is destroyed, should be learning the laws of the sacrifice of the Pesach, the Korban Pesach, or should be tied to this, mainly focusing on learning of the story. And again, the Baal Haggadah wanted to hammer home that our focus should be on the story. And lastly, on the pshat level, I wanted to suggest another element is in terms of the timing of the Korban Pesach and the story that we engage in on Seder night. The story has to end either by Chatzot, and that's the better way halachically even today we hold, but Rabbi Akiva felt that the Korban Pesach could be eaten until the morning, and our Baal Haggadah wanted to stipulate that. However, that's on the pshat level. I want to now delve deeper into this story, and I want to focus on one very important point, and that is that this story takes place in the town of Rabbi Akiva. It takes place in Bnei Brak. And as I already mentioned, Cecil Roth, the historian, suggested that this took place in the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, Rabbi Akiva being one of the people that supported Bar Kokhba. Not all the rabbis felt that. Rabbi Akiva supported Bar Kokhba. He felt the time was right to rebel against Rome. Unfortunately, he was proven wrong. Unfortunately, it led to a massive destruction in the land of Israel. I think somewhere like 500,000 people at least were killed by the Romans in the ensuing battle. This was all after the destruction of the temple, which happened before the Bar Kokhba rebellion. But I want to agree with Cecil Roth that there is something very special about the fact that they are in the home of Rabbi Akiva for the Seder in this time period. It's not clear when this happened, whether it took place during the rebellion, not after the rebellion, but before the rebellion. It's not exactly clear, but I don't think it really matters for what I want to talk about. And what it ties into is the very special nature of Rabbi Akiva himself. One of the most important Tanaim that we know, one of the most important figures in Jewish history. And we'll begin from his journey. Rabbi Akiva, as we know, was not frum when he began. He wasn't a Talmid Chacham. He was an Am Haaretz, so to speak. And so much so he hated Talmidei Chachamim, right? And so it says here in the Avot Rabbi Natan, Ma'at Chilato Rabbi Akiva. What was the beginning of Rabbi Akiva? Amru ben Arbim Shana Haya Velo Shana Klum. He was 40 years old and hadn't learned anything, learned none of the Masoret, none of Torah. Once he was standing on the well, next to the well, Amar Michakak Even Zo. He said, who hollowed out this stone? Amrulo Hamayim Shetadir Noflim Alea B'chol Yom. The water did that by drops on it every single day. Amrulo Akiva Iata Kore Avanim Shachaku Maim. Right? Miyad Rabbi Akiva Dan Kal V'chol Mebatzmo Marach Basar Takasher Divrei Torah Shekashim Kebarzel Alachat Kama V'Kama Shichakuku Et Libi. He says, just like this famous story, just like water is soft and manages to hollow out a rock, surely Torah, which is strong as iron, will be able to enter my heart. And Rabbi Akiva went away and learned Torah. And again, we're not going to get into the story, but Rabbi Akiva's journey begins from a place of tshuva, begins from a place that he believes in change and revolution of himself. And we're going to see other sources about Rabbi Akiva's personality, which highlight why perhaps they were in Rabbi Akiva's house at that time. The next story is a very famous one. I'm going to read it in English, and it's from the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, although it appears in another couple of places. And from that which transpires Rabbi Akiva as well, it can be derived there is no constellation for the Jewish people. In Hebrew, ein mazal, right? There's no like luck or consolation for the Jews. As Rabbi Akiva had a daughter, and the astrologers told him, and this is an important, do we believe in astrology? Do you not believe in astrology? It's a debate for another time, right? He told him on the same day that she enters the wedding canopy, a snake will bite her, she will die. She was very worried about this. On that day, she knew, obviously, her wedding day, she took the ornamental pin from her hand, stuck it into a hole in the wall for safekeeping, and it happened that it went directly into the eye of the snake. In the morning, when she took the pin, the snake was pulled and came out with it. Her father, Rabbi Akiva, said to her, what did you do to merit being safe from the snake? She told him in the evening. A poor person came and knocked on the door, and everyone was preoccupied with the feast, and nobody heard him. I stood and took the portion that you had given me, and I gave it to him. Rabbi Akiva said to her, you performed the mitzvah, and you were saved in its merit. Rabbi Akiva went out and taught based on the incident that even though it is written, and charity will save from death, it does not mean that it will save a person only from an unusual death, but even from death itself. And based on this story, we see that Rabbi Akiva teaches us that, again, you can change your destiny. It was written in the stars, lichora, that she was going to die on her wedding day. However, in the end, it didn't happen because of her mitzvah. But again, it ties into the basic element of Rabbi Akiva's personality, that he believes that you can change. He believed, just like he was a Baal Tshuva. And now, we won't read this just because I'm a little bit conscious of the time. I don't want to go too much. We are on Zoom after all. But there are two stories told, famous story, or maybe the second one's more famous than the first, about Rabbi Akiva, right? And he writes, again, Rabbi Akiva, all four, Nichnasim LaRomi, they went to Rome. Veshamu kol hamoneh shel Romi, umifot leilus ad 120 mile. They heard this loud noise from such a distance. Itkilu hem bochim. They were crying. Rabbi Akiva mesachek, but Rabbi Akiva was smiling and laughing. Amru Akiva anu bochim v'ata mesachek. They said, Akiva, you are crying, but we are crying and you are laughing. Amar lehem v'atem lama bachitem. He said, why are you crying? Amru lo nivkesh hagoyim ovdim avodat kochavim. Right? Lavon l'shachavim latzvehem v'yoshvim betach v'sha'anan v'shalva uveit adom raglei elokeinu ha'elos ve'efetah shumblo lachai taseh v'lo nivkeh. I said, how can it be we're seeing the people that are over avodah zara, right? That are bowing to pesils. They are successful. They are happy. They are cheering. They are great. And you look at the Beit HaMikdash, it's burnt down, and it's animals are walking through it. He said when we shouldn't cry, which is very natural. He says, because of this I'm laughing. This is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing. The people that make him angry. How much greater is it going to be for us when for the people that do his ratzon, do God's will? And then we won't read this because it's quite well known. Another time, this is told together, right? They were walking and they came to Yerushalayim, and they came to the place where you could look out over the destruction, and they tore their clothes. And again, they saw a shual, a fox, leaving the Holy of Holies, and they started crying, and Rabbi Akiva started laughing. And they said, how can you laugh? How can you laugh at such a time? How can you laugh? And he explained that if the nevuot, if the prophecies which prophesize this happening that become true, I know that in the future, the prophecies regarding the Geulah will come true as well. Again, Rabbi Akiva here sees something different from everyone else. He's not looking only at what is in the now, he's looking at what will be in the future. He's someone that is able to change himself, to look at a rock and realize that through that, there's a message for him, and he goes and makes a change, right? It becomes one of the greatest Talmidei Chacham we've ever known. He knows that his daughter is meant to die on her wedding day, and he knows that she's able to change that. He sees the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash when everyone else is crying, he's laughing because he sees it. In the future, this will change. What we have now is only a symbol for what is meant to be. And the Netziv, right, from Volozhin, says as the reason, but I'm going to take it as why they went to Rabbi Akiva's house. It is for this reason that they favored Rabbi Akiva, al shechiskam betikvat klal Yisrael techef achar chorban, because he strengthened the hope of Klal Yisrael just after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Velechen ba'u kulam le'iro, and for that reason, everyone came to his city. Right? L'saper Mitzrayim b'leil Chag Pesach, to talk about the story of the Exodus on Pesach. Mipnei shebeyitziat Mitzrayim miparei nitzchiyut Yisrael, because the story of Yitziat Mitzrayim clarifies for us the eternal nature of Am Yisrael. Right? Shekol kli yotzer alav lo yitzlach lechaloto, that anyone that comes to try and destroy us will not be successful. And actually, the truth is that it's not only true after the destruction of the temple, it's also true around the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, when there were difficult decrees. The Netziv is exactly what I want to say. They go to Rabbi Akiva because he's able to strengthen them. We see throughout that Rabbi Akiva doesn't only see destruction, Rabbi Akiva sees hope, Rabbi Akiva sees the ability to change. And for that reason, they go to Bnei Brak to be with him for the Seder, because Dafka the Seder talks to us about hope in the future, and they needed that from Rabbi Akiva. However, I want to suggest something else, a little bit about Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is able to do something else, which is brought out in this Mechilta from Mitro. I'm not going to read all of it, but again, Rabbi Elazar is sick, and they enter, for the four rabbis, Rabbi Tar from Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar, Ben Azar, Rabbi Akiva, the same four from our story, enter to comfort him, and they say all of these things about how nice he is, how great Rabbi Elazar Ben Azar, Rabbi Elazar is, and how terrible it is that he's in this situation, right? For instance, Nanar Yeshuv Amar Rabbi Chaviva Tal Yisrael Miyom Hakshamim. He says, Rabbi, you are beloved amongst Israel like the days of, like when it rains, right? Not like English weather, talking about Israeli weather, right? And so the day of rain is very, very important. But Rabbi Akiva says something else. Rabbi, Chavivin Yisurin. Rabbi, beloved things that happen to us that cause us great anguish, which is completely opposite to what everyone else was saying. Everyone else was saying how great he is, how great Rabbi Elazar is, but Rabbi Akiva says, great and beloved are Yisurin that come upon us, are the difficult things that come upon us. Again, why is that? Why is that? Because it's not only that he's hopeful, it's that he sees everything differently. You're sick, you're ill, you're in a terrible situation. Actually, even in that, you can find not hope for the future, but even hope right now. Even right now, during these Yisurim, it's beloved, it's great in some way. And again, that we can do a whole shiur on exactly how does that work and how do we justify that. That's for another time. But just this idea of who Rabbi Akiva is, we see even even more, right? And we know the famous story about Rabbi Akiva when he's taken out to die, right? It was decreed that you can't engage in Torah, and Rabbi Akiva went and taught Torah, and he was captured for that reason by the Romans, says the Gemara. And I'll read in English. The Gemara later, when they took Rabbi Akiva out to be executed, it was time for the recitation of Shema. And they were raking his flesh with iron combs, and he was reciting Shema, thereby accepting upon himself the yoke of heaven. His students said to him, our teacher, even now, as you suffer, you recite Shema. He said to them, all my days I've been troubled by the verse, with your soul, meaning even if God takes your soul. I said to myself, when will the opportunity be afforded to me to fulfill this verse? Now that it has been afforded me, shall I not fulfill it? He prolonged his uttering of the word one until his soul left his body as he uttered his final word one. A voice descended from heaven and said, happy you, Rabbi Akiva, that your soul left your body as you uttered one. Again, a terrible image. Rabbi Akiva is the one who should be troubling himself where he is, but he's not troubled by that. He's saying, I'm troubled always by the pasuk, and not understanding the pasuk. And Shema is intimately related with Rabbi Akiva. We all know the stories, unfortunately, from the Shoah and elsewhere, where people shouted Shema Yisrael, which has essentially become a minhag amongst Jews, unfortunately, when they're being martyred in light of Rabbi Akiva. However, just to know, Rabbi Akiva was saying Shema Yisrael because of the time to say Shema Yisrael. But anyway, became a declaration of faith. But interestingly, this is recorded in the Yerushalmi slightly differently. And it notes, just like in the story when they visit Rabbi Eliezer, and also when they come to Yerushalayim and see it destroyed, in the story, there's Rabbi Akiva Omed v'nidun lifnei Tunus Rufus Harasha, right? Tunus Rufus, the evil one. He gives man Kriyat Shema, the time for Kriyat Shema came, he started reciting it and laughing. And he doesn't understand it. How can you be doing this? He says, perhaps you're a witch. Perhaps there's something weird going on. And he says, I'm not that. And he says, and I'm not making light of what's happening to me. All my life, and it carries on and says, I didn't understand the pasuk, how you could, when will I ever be zoche, merit to give my soul completely to Hashem? And here I am doing that. However, interestingly, again, this ties into who Rabbi Akiva is. Rabbi Akiva is someone that gives of himself entirely, but that doesn't mean he gives up hope, right? It doesn't mean he doesn't see the positive in everything that is happening. But I want us to note something else. The Maaseh in the Haggadah speaks of that they were in Bnei Brak all the same night until they came and said it's the time for Shema, the Shema Shel Shacharit. Now, anyone reading those words in light of the Gemara about Rabbi Akiva here cannot help but be taken aback by what is being said. It's as though you read them together, right? They were learning and dealing with Yetziat Mitzrayim all the night until the time of Kriyat Shema Shel Shacharit. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking about Rabbi Akiva, that you know at the end of his life he's going to be martyred by saying Kriyat Shema. And I cannot help but read them together. And in fact, I would suggest that we read them also in light of what is brought after this section in the Haggadah. Amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah Hareini Kuven Shivim Shana V'lo Zachiti Shete'amer Yetziat Mitzrayim Beleilot. Right? Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says, I'm like someone who's 70 years old. I wasn't zoche to know to say Yetziat Mitzrayim, the parasha from Shema, the third section of Shema, which deals with Yetziat Mitzrayim, in the night. Right? Lichora, it should only be said during the day, not necessarily in the night. Ad shedarsha ben Zoma, until Ben Zoma gave the following explanation. As it says in the pasuk, "Leman tizkoret yom tzedcha me'eret Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha." Right? The verse says, so that you remember the day of going out from Egypt, all the days of your life. So how do we learn from there that you also need to remember it in the night? It says, yemei chayecha hayamim. The days of your life refers, you need to say Yetziat Mitzrayim during the days. Kol yemei chayecha, all the days, refers to the night, meaning all day you need to recite in the morning and in the night. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah therefore teaches you need to deal with Yetziat Mitzrayim also in the night. And then it says, it brings a second opinion. But the rabbis interpret it differently. The days of your life, meaning this world, all the days of your life in the days of Moshiach. Even in the days of Moshiach, we're going to be reciting Kriyat Shema. But the question is, why bring this second opinion? Okay, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he's at the Seder in Bnei Brak. Why do they need to bring this second opinion? And I believe the answer is because hidden deep amongst this story is a reference also to what's going on in their time, to the concern for the decrees that the Jewish people are engaging in, and the hope for redemption. Now, the hope for redemption takes place in the guise of Kriyat Shema. Kriyat Shema Shel Shachrit refers, al pi drush, to the Yemot HaMashiach. And that is hinted at here as well in the continuation of the Machloket. The Chachamim explain, you say Kriyat Shema, or the Yetziat Mitzrayim, all your days, and also in the times of Mashiach, meaning, if you remember back to our original Machloket, if you remember back, there was a Machloket whether we talk about the Korban Pesach, the offering of the Pesach, the laws, or whether we talk about the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So just it's a bit convoluted, I guess. But what I want to suggest is that Rabbi Akiva they go to because he is forward-looking. He's hoping Mashiach will come. He's hoping the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt. Even if it isn't, he's optimistic. He sees the good in everything, and that's what the rabbis needed. But more than that, Rabbi Akiva says, once the temple is destroyed, the focus should not be on the Korban Pesach. The focus should be on the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, because the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim will also be told at the end of days. We know the rabbis teach Yemot Mashiach, many of the Korbanot will be cancelled out. But what becomes the focus and should become the focus is the story, because it's the story which builds us as a people. The Korban Pesach is also important. It's what we experienced in Egypt and what we sacrificed in Egypt. But the story is what builds us as a people, and the story is what prepares us for the Geulah that is meant to happen. So just to summarize, what I want to suggest is that Rabbi Akiva, and then we can ask questions, Rabbi Akiva represents hope for that generation. He believed in the Bar Kokhba rebellion because he was so hopeful, because he was expecting Moshiach so much, and that's why they wanted to be with him, because he represented that kind of hope. And the hint in the Haggadah is that we are expectant of the Geulah. We should be expectant of the Geulah, and the focus for our Haggadah should be the story and the future, and less so the Korbanot. But Im Yirtzeh Hashem will all be zoche to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash soon and eat the Korban Pesach, eat tov v'zmano in Yerushalayim. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to take questions if you have some.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I think, and apologies if it was a different part of the Haggadah, but I think I once read or heard that the Rabbonim who were mentioned there didn't all live in the same period, but it could be a different part of the Haggadah. I read about.
No, they lived in the same period.
They all lived in the same period.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
They were, yeah. Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much for joining. Once again, on Wednesday, we're going to have the continuation of the series. My wife, Laura, will be there, and we'll be looking at elements of the four sons, but from a social worker perspective, how we reach the various children and their various neshamot. Following from that, on Monday week, Rav Chaim Cohen will be giving a practical preparation in terms of halacha for the Seder. And finally, on Wednesday, Rav Benji Myers will be giving a practical workshop to prepare our Sedarim in the current circumstance with ideas and ways of staying in touch and being in touch, and also to make it the most interactive that it can. Thank you very much for joining. Good to see everyone, and we'll see you
Thank
later.
you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.